what happened to facts? This is a question I asked myself a few months ago, actually as I was browsing through my Facebook page, dodging the usual wedding pictures and baby pictures and cat memes. And then all of a sudden, a post actually caught my attention. And it was a post from a Facebook friend who will remain anonymous for the sake of this presentation. Now, the Facebook post actually was the usual rant against the Italian government. What was unusual about it was the level of specificity of the criticism. So it went on more or less like this. The Italian government is terrible, GDP is decreasing, and unemployment is going up. So me being the nerd I am, of course the first thing I go is go out and find some data to see whether this was true or not. So here I have the data for you. This is the data from the National Institute of Statistics in Italy. In the top, you see the GDP growth rate of Italy between 2011 and 2017. The red line actually highlights when that government my friend was talking about took charge. As you can see before that, Italy went through a pretty severe recession, but after that, the economy was actually picking up. Perhaps not a lot, but at a steady manner. So the trend was definitely upwards, not downwards. Now, if we take a look at unemployment, sort of the same thing happens. Around February 2014, unemployment was slightly above 12%, and when the government left, was slightly below 12%. So even here, the trend was downward. Perhaps not a great increase, but still. So of course, me not just being the usual nerd, but being the annoying nerd that replies to your Facebook posts, I go on and reply to his Facebook post, and I say, actually, the opposite is true. By the way, GDP is going up and unemployment is going down. And here are the statistics so you can check. Here's the moment of brilliance, though. His reply. His reply went on like this. Well, we might just have different opinions then. Smiley face. So, of course, I'm a social scientist, right? So I'm a little shocked about this. Because in my world, statistics are facts. These are not opinions. For me, this was my first-hand experience with a phenomenon that has been called recently post-truth. So for those of you that don't know the term, post-truth was the 2016 Word of the Year as nominated by Oxford Dictionaries. And sort of is a term that is used to describe an interesting trend in our society. That is, that objective facts are becoming less and less influential on people's behavior and decision-making. And subjective opinions are becoming more and more important, to the point that fact and fiction is becoming hard to tease apart. So, of course, I'm interested about this, right? And I'm trying to understand sort of what happened, and this goes back to my first question. And specifically, what happened to the internet and to social networks, since this is what I study. Now, before actually understanding how social network had an impact on all of this, perhaps it's good to realize that facts were actually never objective in the first place. So let me give you an example for that. Here we have 4 bars, a bar to the left, bar X, and 3 bars to the right, A, B, and C. I have a very simple question for you. How long is X? And specifically, is X as long as A, B, or C? So let me see a show of hands here. How many of you think that X has the same length of A? Okay, how many of you think that X has the same length of B? What about C? Okay, so there's no trick here, no sort of perception game. X is actually as long as B. So the vast majority of you actually got it right. And this is not perhaps surprising. What's more interesting is to sort of figure out why you got it right in the first place. So I'm sure that some of you just saw the objective reality of this. Perhaps some other people were a bit puzzled and just waited to see what the person next to you actually ended up doing, right? So perhaps rather than looking at the objective reality, you sort of consider others' opinions to make your decision. And this was the objective of the conformity experiments done in the 50s by Solomon Asch. Solomon Asch was actually interested in teasing out the fact of conformity versus objective reality. And he asked exactly the same question I ask you right now. Perhaps not surprisingly, 99% of people actually got it right. But then Solomon, a smart man, tweaked it a little bit. So he asked the same question to a participant. Before asking the question, though, he let the participant sit and see the answers of 7 other people. Now, what the participant didn't know is that Solomon planted the answer in these 7 other people. And every single other person actually gave the wrong answer, so A. At that point, clearly the participant is a bit puzzled, right? Is A or B the right answer? Turned out that under this condition and over 12 repeated trials, 75% of people, at least once, conformed to the wrong answer. And an astonishing third conformed to the wrong answer the majority of the time. Now, this is to highlight an interesting aspect about facts. That is that facts are socially constructed, meaning that the way we see reality is only partially influenced by the objective truth. And a lot of the times, social processes end up affecting how we think about reality and what we think truth really is. Now, pretty clearly, the advent of the internet might have exacerbated this problem. Check out what happened last year in Velez, a small town in Macedonia. This is a rural town, 50,000 inhabitants. But this town became the fake news capital of the world. And this was because a set of teenagers from Velez started blogs that started to publish fake news about the presidential elections. Now, why they were doing that? Well, they were not really interested in affecting the outcome of the elections. What they were interested in was into clickbaiting people so that by reading their fake news, they could actually make money using advertising. Now, their plan didn't go through. Google shut them down, but not before having millions of people clicking on those fake news. And I cannot help but thinking, how many thousands of people changed their mind about who to elect, perhaps based on a fake news coming out of Macedonia? Of course, as a social network scientist, I'm very interested about this. I want to try to figure out what's the role of social media into all of this. So let's take a look at this. Before the advent of social media, let's assume that you had a set of people in the American East Coast and another set of people in the American West Coast. And let's assume that one person in the East Coast wanted to say something to somebody on the West Coast. Well, again, before the internet, he could do that, for instance, by setting up a phone contract, a long-range phone contract, which at the time were very expensive, but making a phone call, as expensive as it can be, is still doable. Now, what becomes not doable is making a phone call to everybody on the American West Coast. So all of a sudden, we have a problem. How do we diffuse information in society? Well, that's when intermediaries come up, what we call media. Media can do this in a very efficient manner. Why? Because they're able to congregate and gather information from many people and then redistribute it to somebody else. And by doing that, they're very efficient because they achieve economies of scale and specialization. But they're not just efficient. By having that structural position, media can actually filter information. So if one piece of information, the red line, is actually the good one, and the blue lines are the bad ones, well, media can actually figure that out and decide to retransmit only the red, so the good. So by doing this, they're actually able to tease out the good news from the bad news, or if you want, the signal from the noise. But now social media comes into place. And social media allows somebody from the East Coast to tweet or to post something directly to somebody on the West Coast in a very efficient manner. Now, all of a sudden, media are cut out. And not just by one person, but by many people. So our current situation looks more like this. All of a sudden, as you realize, nobody's central anymore. Nobody has the power to filter information anymore. It resembles chaos. Now, this chaos actually can have a huge impact, not just on our elections, but also on our progress as a society. For instance, take vaccination. Vaccination is widely considered one of the greatest medical achievements of our civilizations. And yet, we're seeing diseases that we used to have defeated, like measles, mumps, whooping cough, chickenpox. We have vaccines for these illnesses, but they still come back. Actually, we have outbreaks not only in developing countries, but also on developed countries. And why is that? Because our networks are sharing these alternative facts about vaccination, about the idea that vaccines are bad for us. And all of a sudden, by not vaccinating our children, people die. So what can we do about this? We need to find a solution. The solution that we usually throw out there is called fact-checking. Fact-checking is the idea that we decide to delegate the task of discriminating the signal from the noise to somebody in society. Now, who is going to be this person? Let's go back to our network. Nobody is central anymore. Nobody has the structural position to be able to filter. Not the newspapers, not the state, and not Google, because everybody can be cut off. And on top of that, who would check our fact checkers? So my solution to this problem is quite simple. You have to become the fact checker. And this is extremely hard because we're not used to think in terms of fact checking. We need to switch our mentality. Now think about it. We were brought up in a situation where we tend to be the passive recipient of information. We enter classrooms and you have people like me saying things. You sit in front of television and then you just see things happening on television or read newspapers. We tend to be passive recipients, passive consumers of information. We have to switch that mentality and move from being passive to become an active user of information, an active diffuser of information. We need to take action. And how can we take action? Well, we can do three things. The first thing we can do is question more and believe a little less. So think about when you have to deal with a used car salesman. Would you ever believe, at least at face value, whatever he or she says? Well, most probably not. And for a good reason, right? Because this person, most likely, is going to have an agenda that is different from yours. Then why, for the same reasons, we go online and we trust information on our Twitter, on our Facebook, on blogs, and on websites? We should be as critical as we would be with any sort of vendors when we interact with somebody on the internet. And particularly, there are two red flags that usually pop up. One are shocking titles. And the second one is the use of statistics sort of to fool you into thinking something different. I have an example here for you. This was a title from the Glasgow Herald, a newspaper from Scotland during the swine flu crisis. You probably remember it. It was from a few years ago. And this was the title. There's a 40% rise in swine flu deaths in 48 hours. Now, this is pretty shocking, right? And if this is true, then definitely we would have to go out and take action for it. But then we read the fine print and we realize that this was due only because 2 extra people died, right? So all of a sudden, this newspaper was playing around with statistics to try to fool us into reading what they were trying to write. Now, a good way to sort of sort out whether somebody is trying to do that is to search more. And by search more, I mean, let's just use the tools we have to try to figure out where the truth is. The point here, the basic principle, is that every single source we read is biased. But not every single source is biased the same way. And the only way to remove that bias is to triangulate. Go out, find more sources, and try to figure out where the truth lies. If you speak multiple languages, that's great. Go and read about the same news in different languages, because that's already a great way to find independent sources. But if you don't, well, just use Google or your favorite search engine. Spend a few minutes to figure out whether a specific piece of information actually is closer to reality. Finally, the third thing we can do is to engage more. And we should engage on a personal level by questioning, by searching, but also engage with others. But don't engage like me. Don't do what I did with my friend. Don't go on a public space and prove them wrong, because people don't like that, and that's just going to backfire. Engage in a more positive manner. Create open conversations with people that have different opinions from you. It's very important to give others the benefit of the doubt, because this is the best way to be disproven or to be proven wrong, which is great because that means that we just learned something. So we start this journey from a simple Facebook post, but we sort of realizing this is much bigger than that. It's a brand new world. Our social networks have fundamentally changed. Information is getting democratized. And that's very exciting, right? Because that means that we have power over information, not anybody else. But that's also very scary and potentially a threat, because if we don't do something soon, the future and the health of our democracies, of our institutions, of our children is potentially at risk. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge. This is a ratio, 3:1, of fake news to good news that are posted on Twitter every day. Together, we have to reverse this ratio. And we can do that only if we question more, if we search more, and we engage more. This is important for our future. I want to leave you, actually, with one final quote. A lot of people think that freedom is the possibility to go online and write whatever you want. I like to think about freedom in a slightly different manner. And here I'm quoting Giorgio Gaber, a famous Italian singer-songwriter. Freedom for him was participation. In the age of post-truth, I think these words sound as true as ever. Thank you.